Hey everybody, welcome back to the Donna Jones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. And can you believe it's November? We are kicking off a brand new month sponsored by MissionGO, dedicated to global industry leaders. And what better person to have on the show today than Chris Corgnati, the president of MissionGO. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
great to be here.
Yeah, we are very glad you're here. And by the way, everybody, if you did miss any episodes from last month, which were all about industry enablers, sponsored by True Weather and Grand Sky, check those out, right? You can absolutely subscribe to Drone Life TV on YouTube, so I recommend you do that. And just a reminder, we are live. So we know you're out there. Drop a note to us in the chat, say hello, tell us where you're from. Ask Chris your questions, because MissionGO is doing some incredible things, and I'm sure you've seen them at the various conferences, but do you really know what they do? And that's what this show is all about. So why don't we go ahead and kick it off with a little video. All right, that's so much going on in that video. We are going to peel that back. But before we do, I'd like Chris to tell us. Chris, could you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Yeah, spent most of my life, for going back, I graduated from Villanova University out of the ROTC program, got commissioned in the Navy. Didn't intend to stick around for that long, and 25 years later, I finally retired in 2015. The last 3 years in uniform, I ran the Navy's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance airborne programs, which included all of the unmanned aircraft and all the drones. That's how I got my introduction. Was flying P3s most of the time before that, and then got into the unmanned world at the end of my career. After that, I worked supporting NASA Aeronautics as a consultant for a couple of years. Ran another startup UAS manufacturing and service company for a year, and then was consulting on my own for about 3 years, from 4-person startup companies all the way up to folks like General Atomics and everywhere in between. So, and then January of this year came on as the president of MissionGO. So super excited to be here with you, and obviously to be part of MissionGO and be able to highlight all the great stuff that we've got going on here to the audience.
Well, what an incredible background that you bring to the table for MissionGO. And by the way, everybody, if you missed Chris's Clubhouse last Thursday, check that out. We'll drop the link in the chat. You can listen to that on replay. We got a little more deep into his background, but and you also told us how basically a colleague of yours called you up and said, hey, how about coming on board to MissionGO? And obviously here you are. So let's talk about the origin story for MissionGO, because
Sure.
I love the story, and I think it's so important when you think about what you're doing now and how you've expanded over time. So could you share that with us?
Absolutely. Yeah, so one of our co-founders, Dr. Joe Scalia, was a world-renowned transplant surgeon, was here at the University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore, and had this idea of why are we not using uncrewed aircraft or drones to transport organs? It's a critical need, that last mile, getting things quickly and efficiently to a waiting recipient. He partnered through the University of Maryland and the University of Maryland Test Center down at Pax River with Tony Pucciarella and Ryan Henderson, both founding members of MissionGO. And they went and did the flight in 2019 where they flew a kidney that was transplanted into a human being for the first time, was delivered via drone. So out of that grew MissionGO, and then and brought in partner with Scott Plank, who's our executive chairman of the board, to create the company back in 2019. And so we continued, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those other things we've done in the critical medical cargo delivery space. But that was the origins 2019. And out of that initial group of people and capabilities, we have actually spun off. There's two other companies that we call them sister companies. Alaris Pro, which does maintenance tracking and reliability data collection on the software side, and then MissionGO, which actually tracks organs from the donor to recipient and all of the logistics in between to get things, again, efficiently to where they're going, whether it's in a car, courier, aircraft, or in our case, a drone. So really great story that has spawned through three companies, all based here in Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah. So, by the way, Chris, I got to acknowledge some folks in the chat already jumping in. Phil Franklin's mentioned your video and said it was high energy. Absolutely loved it. And Russell Ledford from South Carolina, Two Trail Hikers Productions, listened to your Clubhouse and really enjoyed it. Says that MissionGO is doing amazing things. And I mean, I can't agree more. When I heard you in Clubhouse, listening to you now, I get chills when I hear this origin story, because it is so critically important. Good friend of mine and colleague, Tony Drummond, Global Aero Management, Prestige Air Group, charter aircraft company, was, part of what they were doing was transporting these organs. And that was kind of part of her journey too, realizing how quickly they need to get there. And then when you land a plane, like you said, Chris, that last mile, getting it to the actual doctor and into the operating room is so critical. And I don't have at the tips of my fingers the statistics, but I know we lose some organs, along the way, which is just tragic. And to be able to, solve that problem. And so the first one was remind me, it was a kidney?
It was.
Yeah.
And we've done other research projects to get to your point. We flew a research pancreas in, I believe that one was in the Midwest. Yeah, and I think in Minnesota, doesn't matter. But what they did is they biopsied it, took all the measurements, then we flew it for about, I think it was 10 or 11 miles. They came back and they biopsied it again to see what was the quality of the trip and was there any damage or degradation to the tissue, because it's important to know, different organs have different sensitivities to barometric pressure, to vibration, to temperature, to all those environmental factors. So, the packaging, the cooling, all those things have to be taken into account. And it turned out, after looking at it, that the trip in this case, the MGV 100, our all electric aircraft, was as good, if not better, than any other mode of transportation in preserving and not damaging the tissue. So that was a great success. But you're right. It's and minutes do matter, and all these things unfortunately have a shelf life. So anywhere you can maintain visibility across the supply chain and make sure that the next person in that chain is ready to receive it and move it on, those things matter.
Yeah, and I think we actually may have a video, Chris, of the LifeSource operation that you were just mentioning there, right. Using the pancreas or transporting that pancreas in the upper Midwest, Mercy Hospital, a part of the Alena Health System. So maybe we can roll that and you can kind of walk us through, as a practical matter, how this works.
Sure. Again, we would be part of a multimodal supply chain to move that organ, again, from the donor to the recipient, and here it's delivered to the airfield or to the helipad. In this case, we have our team loads it into the box specifically designed for our aircraft, and then they carefully load it. There's a universal rail system on the bottom that we've adapted, and once that's locked in place, in a matter of seconds, the aircraft is prepped and ready to go. and then they take off. And then on the other end, same thing. There's a couple of quick releases once the aircraft is safed. Getting a little ahead of the video, but once they come back and land, you'll see them safe it, and then you download the box and then hand it off to the medical team who takes it from there. So yeah, absolutely, especially places where you've got either infrastructure challenges due to a weather event or a natural disaster, or just traffic. We look around here just in Baltimore. There's 3 main medical centers. And to get from one to the other can be an hour plus drive, especially if there's a large event in town or summer weekend here around the Inner Harbor, where we could be in a matter of several minutes from a heliport across the street from us that we have access to any of those airports in literally under 5 minutes. I
was going to foot stomp this point, Chris. This loop we're showing here was a 10.2 mile circuit.
Right.
That's significant.
And the aircraft,
go ahead.
We can get into the aircraft a little bit more later, but again, it's a 55-pound all-electric helicopter, and you can see in this picture it's got a ballistic parachute, which we will take off when it's certified by the FAA, and you'll be able to do 15 pounds for 30 miles and fly over an hour on a single charge. So it's pretty significant payload and range capability of this aircraft.
And you had mentioned this, but just again, not to put too fine a point on it, when they, you see one of the folks here grabbing the box, opening it. I assume that it was a successful. We got a thumbs up. So the biopsies, the actual organ had not been damaged in any way during this 10.2 mile round trip flight. Because
it's a very low vibration aircraft. It flies extremely smoothly. We don't go to huge altitudes, so the barometric pressure wasn't, and all of the different organs have different requirements again, but they all have some sort of cooling. So they have the inside box is cooled to maintain that organ.
We've seen in Ukraine drones being used for battlefield resupply for things like blood, like what you're talking about. And I know you all worked also with the Living Legacy Foundation of Maryland. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was actually, we went out and simulated what we could do in the Baltimore region. We set up out in the countryside test sites, which replicated the distance and the geometry and distances of the different medical centers, and basically said, hey, we're going to fly, samples, they weren't real blood samples, but simulated blood samples across this network just to prove how quickly and efficiently you could do it. And so that was a success as well, because it gives people the data. Here's the art of the possible. Here's what we could be doing today, if and when the regulations, catch up to the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And Will Silva is out there. That's incredible. And looks like Kimberly Hayes is asking, what was the Aircraft Association? I don't know that we talked about an Aircraft Association. Did we?
I did not.
No. So Kimberly, if you could refine your question, not really sure what you're asking there, but and then before we go on to some of the other, because you're doing so many things like this was your origin story. You've, like I said, grown and built this expertise, and in fact spun off 2 additional companies, as you mentioned, Alaris Pro and MissionGO. Let's talk about the Nevada Donor Network, because this flight that you did was in September of 2020. And by the way, think about that, everybody. That's kind of in the heart of COVID. You did one of the longest organ deliveries flights in the world. So tell us about that.
I mean, that was unique again from the environment. We try and test the aircraft, and you want hot, you want high density altitude, cold temperatures, all those different variables to prove the aircraft system. But that was also in and around McCarran Airport. So you're coordinating with a very large, busy commercial airport. And again, like you said, getting out there in the 11, 12 mile range. And just, again, that's only half the range of what we could have done on that flight. But again, that was just the way we had set it up for that test. But we can routinely operate in and around airports. Our team understands all the airspace, all the FAA communications. And so that was a great test case for us to be able to operate in and around a busy commercial airport.
I think probably most of the people watching this show, Chris, have been to Vegas one time or another and appreciate how busy McCarran Airport can be, and secondarily, how flipping hot Las Vegas can be. I believe this year at Commercial UAV, I don't know if it was Tuesday, I think we were up to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So to be able to operate under those extreme conditions in complex airspace, really significant.
So those are good test cases geographically too, because especially out west, where a lot of organs are going to be transported by either private or commercial aviation, they're going to go into an airport or to a hub to be able to quickly transition that from a Southwest Airlines flight into a drone and get it to the hospital quickly instead of fighting through traffic. There's some huge advantages because on the East Coast, time differences are different. Some of the transportation modes are a little different. But when you get into more rural, sparsely populated or geographically separated areas, there's a good chance it's going to move by air.
Absolutely. And you all are breaking records, not just in terms of distance traveled, but also in terms of time improvements. I was remiss, Chris, not to mention the Living Legacy Foundation flights we were just talking about in Maryland. I believe when I talked to you offline, you said there was an approximately 292% time improvement over ground transportation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, depending on where you are here in Baltimore, I mean, you could imagine something in New York City, right? If you needed to get from New Jersey or Brooklyn or Staten Island into Manhattan to one of the medical centers there, if you can avoid the tunnels, you've saved hours. So there's overcoming either natural obstacles or man-made, congestion obstacles. It's a perfect use case for the aircraft.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so you started with the medical use case, and by the way, I during our briefing before the show, I'm like, Chris, don't get distracted by the chat. I'm getting distracted by the chat. There, like, so many people are jumping in. We really appreciate all of you. Kimberly did ask the name of the aircraft, and I believe Mike dropped that into the chat for us. We're going to be talking about that aircraft here shortly, so stick around. And then William Payne just says, as the crow flies is always the fastest, unless there's bad weather. What are the weather restrictions for below like 500 feet?
So like any small UAS, I mean, icing would be a concern. We can handle some light to moderate rain. Not an issue. And the nice thing about a single rotor helicopter is its flight characteristics in wind. We've actually flown that aircraft, it's the NGV 100, up in excess of 40 knots of wind, and it's rock solid. It really, I mean, there's a reason single rotor helicopters with a tail rotor are good in a lot of applications. Quadcopters have their role in different things, and we use them for our infrastructure inspection work, which we'll talk a little bit about coming up. But if you get into wind and you need range, endurance, and payload, a quadcopter's not the preferred way to go. And then you get into an aircraft like the MGV 100. It's got some significant advantages, especially in wind.
So besides the organs and the blood that you simulated there, all the things you're doing, expanded into AED delivery, right? So someone's having a heart attack, they need that machine that will shock people.
Right.
So tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah, we did a demonstration at a golf course down in Virginia, and exactly that. So it's pretty easy. Cargo is cargo at some point. You're just carrying, and you get it out there in the AEDs now. They basically you hit the on button and they will talk you through exactly what to do. So if somebody's on the far side of a golf course and they call in and say, hey, somebody's having a heart attack out on the ninth green or whatever. You can launch very quickly in a matter of a minute or two. They landed on the green. Somebody grabs the AED and can apply it by somebody jumping in a golf cart. And again, in those situations, the seconds and minutes do matter. So time of response is huge. So we can cut that down.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was just one example. And you can obviously get to examples where the time distance is even greater than it would be on a golf course, and then the advantages would be even better.
Oh yeah, I imagine people are really trekking across in a little golf cart, which isn't going to be fast, dodging people along the way,
Yeah.
around the ninth green or whatever. That's significant. And so many other missions. I also love what you all are doing with, let's just call them marginalized communities. We hear a lot about the Choctaw Nation because they've been so active and involved in the FAA's Integration Pilot Program, now the Beyond Program, and doing great things in Oklahoma. But you actually work with the Navajo Nation, which frankly, I don't know that many people know about this story. So can you share us like how you assisted the Navajo Nation?
Sure, and that was another great, demonstration to show people what the art of the possible is, and to get them excited about the potential to incorporate that into their operations, and into how they manage their territory, their people, and support folks. But it's a very large geographic area, sparsely populated, and so and geographically the infrastructure, there's not superhighways out in Navajo Nation. So they have a lot of dirt roads that either, in heavy rains become trapped in mud. They have a lot of snow. So there are people who get isolated. And we did things, we delivered food, delivered water, human medicine, and veterinary medicine were the four use cases. Because a lot of folks, their livelihood is based on their livestock. So if they've got a sick animal and they need to get medicine out there, a lot of times flying is by far the cheapest, quickest way to get things. Sometimes the only way to get those critical supplies to someone out again who's isolated.
You
Yeah,
you like you said, you've kind of perfect one delivery case, which frankly, the one you perfected was probably one of the most nuanced and difficult ones right off
sure.
the get-go. And so delivering something like an AED or, as you said, veterinary supplies to the Navajo Nation is probably even a little bit earlier. But I want, and obviously pizzas, we talked about that on Clubhouse. I'm not going to go into the pizza
Yeah,
thing, but although that was a fun one. I want to talk about critical infrastructure inspections because,
sure.
kind of transition to that because,
Okay.
like I said, you started with this medical use case, a whole bunch of deliveries, two companies spin out of that, but doing a lot with critical infrastructure. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so we're super excited. We were just awarded in the last several weeks a 3-year, $50 million contract with Southern California Edison to do. Thank you. To do electrical grid inspections. Huge need in California and much of the West due to climate change and the drought that they're experiencing. Wildfires are a fair number of them attributed to the power grid. So there's two reasons to do it, right? It's not only to avoid wildfires, but to maintain quality of service and to reduce downtime. So we go out and do high resolution photographic inspections of both distribution and transmission assets to identify anything from a frayed wire, a cracked insulator, down to a missing cotter pin. And by getting those, doing that first pass analysis, if there's a critical problem, we can call it in immediately and dispatch a crew to come fix it. If it's a lower priority, again, that cues the maintenance personnel from the utility company to know where to go to spend their time instead of just going and climbing up a pole to see if it's okay. We can very quickly and efficiently survey those poles for them and then cue the maintenance teams.
Now, Chris, are you using your MGV 100 for these inspections or a different drone or a bunch
So
of
not
different
currently.
drones?
Yeah, no, currently the way the inspections are currently done is with quadcopters and multi-rotors. And the once we can start flying beyond visual line of sight and we get the type certified, we will then look to bring that aircraft in. Again, because of the range and endurance, I would love to be able to fly that miles and miles and inspect a bunch of poles all at once. But the way that it's currently done under Part 107 was with a variety of multi-rotor aircraft. And all those, everybody across the industry is in the process of recapitalizing away from DJI as the federal government and most all major utilities have basically said they're outlawed, as of the 1st of January for that kind of work.
Wow. Okay. I missed that memo on the 1st of January, but honestly, it doesn't shock me because I had heard rumors about this even as early as June when I went to the Energy Drone Robotics Coalition Summit. People were starting to talk about, yeah, there's going to be like a widespread ban across critical infrastructure as well. So I know people get energized about that. I don't want to squirrel on it. What I want to do is talk about your drone, even though you're not using it for these applications, at least now, because we have so much interest out there, people asking questions. So if we can pop that picture up to kind of get a good visual of the MissionGO MGV100. So Chris, can you kind of walk us through the specs? And then I'm going to ask you the question that Russell Ledford had dropped in the chat when you're done.
Okay. So again, it's at 55 pounds just because that's the way it's designed to operate under Part 107 today. We could take it up to probably 70 or 75 pounds without major modifications based on the capabilities of the aircraft, but we're limited to that for now. It's mostly carbon fiber and it's fully redundant. And what I mean by that is there's two completely separate drivetrains on the aircraft with two motors, two speed controllers, and two drivetrains. In addition, the swash plate that controls the angle of the blades, instead of having 3 servos, which would be normal of an aircraft this size, we have 4. And then the batteries are wired both in series and in parallel. So you could literally lose a motor, speed controller, a servo, and one side of or 2 of the 4 batteries, and the aircraft would continue to fly just fine. And we've actually recently just proved that to a potential client who said, "Hey, you say you can do this," and we said, "Okay," and we actually took the parts off the aircraft, handed it to the client, flew the aircraft, and they were like, "Oh, wow, you're not kidding."
Told you so. That's too funny.
Yeah.
Well, the really cool thing too, Chris, I know that you all had some big news about this particular aircraft. You're, as you mentioned earlier, I believe you're in the process of getting type certified. We just had the first one, the FAA approved, come out notice of this like in August or early September, and you all have your FAA airworthiness criteria published right now. Is that right?
Yeah, again, huge milestone for us in the life of that aircraft as we go to get it certified. So that was done back in September. The comment period is closed. We're waiting for the final report back from the FAA, I think, with any comments that were submitted through the Federal Registry. So that's moving along, and we're really excited to get that aircraft through certification in 23. So people that know the process know once you get that, we've got a little bit more paperwork to give the FAA to lock in the design. And once they approve that, we'll then build 4 conforming aircraft exactly to the design that they've approved, and then take those out in the field, start testing them, fly a couple hundred hours, and prove to the FAA that the design and the production is up to standards to be able to get that type cert, which would then, presumably open up access to airspace over people as well as beyond visual line of sight as we move forward, which is a huge advantage for us.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Chris, because I think most of us are aware of the process for rulemaking that the FAA has, because everybody throws an NPRM. We just went through the remote ID drill, or the notice of public rulemaking. Probably most of us weren't aware that when you're going through this process for type and product certification, that the FAA puts your information out to the public for them to comment on it. It's just really... Yeah, it's kind of really interesting. So we got a bunch of questions here. I'm gonna go through these a little bit. The first question was, how long does it take to launch the aircraft for a mission, and then how much time to kind of shut it down and retrieve the package, like we saw in that video?
To set it up like from the box to launch it, an experienced crew, you could probably certainly under 10 minutes because the way we have a special case that we built for it, where you don't have to take very much off except for the blades. Everything comes in one case, and so you can be up and flying very quickly. But once we land, like in the medical cargo instance, it takes roughly a minute for the aircraft to spool down. Once it does that, the crew will come in and safe it. There's basically a key that safes it so that the motor can't engage, regardless of the commands that it gets from anywhere else. And then you download the box. So I would say from touchdown to removing the box, you're talking 1 to 2 minutes.
All right, gotcha. That's pretty impressive. And then we talked briefly about China or DJI. Are there any parts from
China was one of the questions. There won't be when we finish and get going into certification where, we're required to replace a couple of things based on the country of origin and the supply chain. So there's a few left on the list, but we're working our way through those. Yeah, that whole, again, we're not going to get into great detail on this, but the prohibitions, at least in law right now, are only applicable to the Department of Defense. A couple of states threw some things out there by policy, some feds, but again, critical infrastructure folks, they're doing that. It's a choice. And what I would say to everybody out there about this topic, it's super nuanced. It's not just like any parts. Like there's like I think there has to be a connection or something. It has to be a significant. I don't think it's just like any component. So anyway, I commend that to your attention. Read up a little bit on that. But great stuff. And one thing we didn't talk about, because I'm actually writing an article right now about weather. You mentioned the surface ceiling. I know you didn't mention this. I want to mention this. The surface ceiling is about 8,000 feet, mean sea level, MSL. Yeah, I mean, the aircraft certainly is capable of going that high. There's probably not a lot of use cases where it would make sense to go that high. But you certainly, but it's important to be able to, when you go to higher density altitudes, and if you want to operate in the mountains and some different environments, that does become important. Whether 8,000, MSL versus AGL, AGL would probably be like, well, why am I flying that high to begin with? Right. But yeah, the aircraft is super capable. There's a lot of power, and we can get up to those altitudes if needed. Now in the video, Chris, we saw, pilots, we saw a crew, as you said. So are there, it's not fully autonomous at this time, right? There's a lot of autonomy built into it. Yeah, the aircraft is capable. We can set it up to fly from point A to point B and pre-flight the aircraft, hit the takeoff button, and not touch another thing, and the aircraft will do exactly what you told it to do. There's no intervention that needs to happen. We do currently have a handheld controller that if we're doing a demo or a test and we want to induce certain flight characteristics, we can use that. Or in a case of an emergency, you could potentially take over manually as well. But for normal operations, the controller sits on the table next to the ground control station and isn't used because the aircraft will do it entirely. Wow, that's awesome. And speaking of ground control station, it's a great segue to the video command center solution that you all created. I mean, not just for critical infrastructure, which is key, right? To be able to stream video in real time. So for example, engineers or people that doing the inspection from afar can look at things on the spot, but also, for medical delivery, and then of course, public safety, which we're going to get into here in a second. So tell us a little bit about the VCC, your video command center. Yeah, we're pretty proud of that because it was actually conceived, designed, built in-house entirely. And it came out of the first responder community from our work training police, fire, and search and rescue crews, where they would go on scene, and the only person who had a view of what was going on at the time would be the operator or the pilot, looking at their handheld controller on a small screen. And, then you roll in an on-scene commander, somebody else is looking over their shoulder saying, hey, what's this? What's this? And you want that sort of, the sterile cockpit that we talk about in aviation. You want that when you're operating an uncrewed aircraft as well. So what we do is the video feed would go from the controller from the aircraft into the video command center, which is in a ruggedized Pelican case with a flip-up 27-inch high-resolution screen. So anybody else who's on site can sit there and look at the picture and analyze what's going on. And then we also then feed that in. There's a full computer. You can run a ground control station in it if you want to. And there's also a cell or mobile phone modem. So we can pipe it to any IP address in the world as long as you got a cell connection. Yeah, and you mentioned for inspections, it's great because we can have it out there. And again, instead of looking at insulators and cotter pins on a small screen, we can then just pipe it into the VCC and you get a much clearer, bigger view of what you're looking at, and much easier to analyze the problem. Well, in that picture, we saw our brothers in blue, all, around your video command center. And,
as I think about all the work you're doing, it's almost like every single possible use case that's good for society, like MissionGO, has their fingerprints on it. And public safety in particular, I know you guys were featured on the news because you had worked with some law enforcement officers to find a missing child. Can you tell us about that one?
There's actually been a couple instances where we were actually doing training with first responders, and they observed something. In that case, they were looking for a child and spotted them and found it. In other cases, they've actually observed criminal activity, and the police called in backup and responded to activity that they saw during the training. So it's a great, give them a great real world example of the art of the possible and what can happen when they employ that technology. So that's actually happened on several occasions. So
yeah,
great,
no,
great story.
I smile because you're Navy, I'm Air Force, and I would be advising on these kind of things. It's like that incidental collection you're talking about, where you're focused on one thing and then you pick something up in the frame,
Right.
and by the way, legally, it's okay, everybody. Like the police don't need to get a warrant if they see someone like committing a crime. Now,
No, yeah,
they might have to
that's
down the road, but they can use that video. Like they were not
absolutely
out there looking for that. So
correct.
it's a powerful tool.
Very much
And
so.
you had mentioned the training. So tell us about the training that Mission Go does as well, not only to
Sure.
first responders but also to
Yeah,
companies with critical
we
infrastructure.
created our training team, and part of that is we have an online learning management system where we've digitized a lot of the coursework and the content to be able to do parts of it remote and do refresher training for our own teams. But that was intended to support both our critical infrastructure inspection folks and the critical
Yeah.
cargo delivery things. And we had excess capacity, and we also are blessed to have a handful of super capable former police and fire folks on staff, and they are amazing at taking that to those first responders. And we can do sort of soup to nuts where we go in, we do part 107 training, we help them do hardware, we get them set up with a maintenance program, we can do advanced tactical training like search and rescue and finding a child in the woods kinds of things, and get them up and running, and then periodically go back and check in on them and do an audit or an evaluation, and get them sort of reset to keep those programs operating safely and efficiently. So that's
Yeah. No.
yeah, it's obviously it's great community engagement for us, and we like to do it, and we're starting to expand. We've got some potential partnerships coming up to be able to do that more nationally, but it's just here in the Mid Atlantic region.
So let's talk about one of your newer partnerships in this arena, right? It's the Unmanned Vehicles Technology folks, UVT
Mhm.
partnership. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, UVT's been a great partner. They've been a hardware provider for us and for some of our training clients in the past, and they've got training needs as well. And they brought us on as one of their preferred training partners, especially as they're I think getting ready to launch a drone as a first responder program in a couple of locations. We are looking to partner with them and be part of the training and implementation of those the drone as a first responder. And if you're not familiar with those are basically on-call systems, sort of a drone in the box. When they get a 911 call, the drone will launch and put eyes on either an accident scene or whatever the call for assistance was, so it can be there quicker and then inform the response is, hey, no, there is an actual huge fire. We need more trucks. We need more of this. Whatever the case may be. So as you implement that, there's a bunch of considerations, obviously training of the personnel, but it's where do we install them? What's the electromagnetic spectrum look like in that area? Where's the interference? Who are we going to step on? Flight passes or an airport nearby, all those kinds of things where we can help them lay out the best implementation plan. So that's a growing partnership, and we really enjoy working with them. They're great folks.
Yeah, that's an exciting one. We actually, Chris, had Tani Smith. She has her own drone company doing property management inspections out in California, but works for Flying Lion, who works with Chula Vista PD. So we had a whole segment actually on drone as first responder in September when we talked about, kind of incredible market use cases. But yeah, I mean, that's exciting that you're getting into that arena too, because again, like I said, these are all the ones that benefit society in one way or another. Let's see, we've got our super fan Chris Wedgeworth out there saying this is great. Okay, Chris, I'm gonna read this, and then you can tell me if this makes sense, because it doesn't completely to me.
Okay.
This would be great during PSPS here in the PNW to bring the grid back online as soon as the event is over.
Yes. What he means, Pacific Northwest, but those are post, especially high wind events out on the West Coast, where if you had a preventive shutdown, they do routinely have to shut off part of the power grid to prevent damage to it during a high wind or another weather event. And then you want to go out and do a quick inspection of it prior to re-energizing the lines, so you then don't, either exacerbate the problem or cause a wildfire. So yes, and that's part of the work that we do in Southern California as well. But we'd love to do in the Pacific Northwest as well.
John, so this was John Lee, and put in the chat, public safety power shutdown, PSPS. So thank you for that. Having again been in the military, hypersensitive to acronyms, I don't know them all, especially for public safety. That's not my specific background, but thank you for that. And Chris, I think on Clubhouse we talked about maybe you guys are hiring. It looks like you've got our buddy out there. Two Trail Productions, Russell Ledford from South Carolina wants to be part of your team. So that's it for him. But how do people get in touch with you?
MissionGO.io is our website. Hit it up. There's a career tab in the upper right-hand corner that'll take you to the careers page and show you what are open. Yeah, as part of this new contract, we are hiring about 60 folks in the next several weeks. So if you're interested, hit it up today. We'd love to talk to you.
You hear that, everybody? 60, as in 60 people they're looking to hire. So there, you heard it here first on the Dawn of Drones. I love having announcements like that, Chris.
Yeah, we're super.
That's a big one. I mean, so many other announcements. You have, look, we're rounding out 2022. 1 month, a little bit to go, right? Holidays coming up here in the United States. Any other big announcements before we're getting close to our time?
Yeah, and our big outlook for 23 is executing very well on our partnership with SCE, continuing to build our training program like we talked about, and some strategic partnerships, and then getting the MGB 100 certified through the FAA process. If we can accomplish all those in 23, I'd be pretty happy.
That would be a banner year, to be sure. Yes. You've come very far this year as well. We've got a question here.
Okay.
How much does a drone pilot make? This is James Standen, by the way. Before you go is his handle. He has an incredible YouTube channel where he does review drones. Just throwing that out there, Chris. He's got tens of thousands of followers. He's asking, how much does the drone pilot make?
It really depends on levels of experience, quite honestly, and where you're operating around the country. Obviously, labor markets. But we heard recently someone quoted the average drone pilot in the state of Texas is like $82,000 right now.
Yeah, that's where James is, by the way. So you're actually, you're no pun, you're on the money, Chris. Yeah. Because I think James was the one that said it was about 80 grand. So
I would say that's pretty much on the high end. But I would say to start out, in the 60 to 80 range, again, depending on where you are and your qualifications, and then we've got some very experienced folks that we use in different capacities, but that's a great place to start.
Yeah, and I know we have the link for MissionGO. I know it'll play at the end, so we're about 1 minute out. Chris, I think you're, like for many of us, the travel circuit is wound down for this year. Where might people find you maybe early into 2023, MissionGO?
Yes, so some of the big venues we've talked about is AUVSI. We're there. I hope to see you again at our party, Don, this year. Commercial Drone Expo will definitely be at this year out in Vegas, and the energy specific shows in Houston, drone robotics, the energy show there. And we're looking at one or two others, but those are, we're obviously targeting the kind of work that we're looking to do, and also looking at some cargo specific, but we haven't locked those in yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we'll be seeing a lot of each other next year, Chris. So I'm excited to get to see you in person. And so we are kind of, at time here, Chris. Before we dial off, do you have any closing comments for the crowd out there?
Just thanks for the opportunity to continue to get the word out about MissionGO. We're growing. The company's doing great stuff. I got an amazing team. And 22 has been a launching point for us, and just really excited about what 23 has in store for us.
Well, we'll be watching, Chris. Thank you so much. And everybody, don't forget to join us tomorrow on Clubhouse. We're going to have Defense Solutions, part 303 of their 3-part series. Zohar Halakmi is their CEO. So he will be with us tomorrow. So that should be a really great show. So check that out, 1 p.m. Eastern. And Zohar will be on this podcast next week, same time, same place. That's it. We are out here.